Hello there folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide and Merry Christmas. Welcome to Christmas Day at Oak Lodge, my annual celebration of the festive day here at my woodland retreat. And I've been away from the channel for a while. I've had to take a bit of a sabbatical, but I'm pleased to say I'm fully back and we have a brand new program of new videos coming immediately after this one in the weeks ahead. But today it's Christmas Day in the woodland and I'm going to do all of the things that I normally do here at the channel on this special day. I've got the fire just behind me, just getting started. We're going to sit down and we're going to have a chat next to the fire in a moment. First of all though, unfortunately it's time for that festive wreath that I make every year for the front door of Oak Lodge. Don't worry, you won't have to watch me struggling with it. I'll just speed it up and then we will have something special today. Now last year I cooked a full Christmas dinner in my Dutch oven. We've done that, so today I'm going to have a Christmas cocktail. And when I've shown you what I'm going to make, which will tipple to enjoy the day, I'm going to tell you a story which warmed the cockles of my heart. It's a tale of arduous daring do and ultimate friendship, and I hope you'll enjoy it. A bit of a Christmas Day story. So first of all, I'm going to crack on and make my annual wreath, but you guys, you don't have to worry. I'm going to speed this up. No need for you to go through the pain of watching me struggle with this wreath again. Well folks, I'm pleased to say the pain is over and we have a wreath for the door of Oak Lodge. So now we can reward ourselves with a sit down and a Christmas cocktail. Hello there folks, welcome back. Now we've got that wreath business out of the way, we can have fun. And as you can tell, today I'm not going to make a Christmas dinner for you. Today it's a lot easier. It's a Christmas cocktail, and today I'm going to make you something called Explorer's Iced Tea. And the reason for that will become apparent when we sit down by the fire, which is just going rather nicely over there, and we start to have a chat about why Explorers and ice are relevant today. But this is a nice easy one, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. Now the ingredients are very easy. It's whiskey, it's triple sec, or Cointreau, whatever you use as your orange infused liqueur, ice, Coke of some kind, cola of some kind, and a lemon. Easy as that. Let's begin with the easiest thing, ice. So I've got some ice here, plenty of ice. It's a tall drink, so as much ice as you care to put in. That's the easy bit. Now I am going to put in half a lemon, or half a lemon's juice, nice and squeezed. So I'm going to save a bit just to garnish it at the end, but I'm going to squeeze half a lemon's juice into here. So there's going to be a little bit of bitterness in here, but it's all good. It'll all measure out. There we go. Plenty of lemon juice. Now, the recipe calls for about 40 milliliters of whiskey of some kind. Now today, in keeping with the theme of Explorer iced tea, I'm using some of my favourite whiskey called Shackleton whiskey. Now this is a modern day whiskey which was recreated from some whiskey which was provided by McKinley's of Scotland to the Shackleton expedition to the Antarctic in the early days of the 1900s. So this whiskey has got the heritage of an explorer, and in fact the recipe for today's Explorer iced tea I have taken from the Shackleton whiskey website. I've been drinking this stuff for a while now and it's my favourite whiskey. Even though it's a blended whiskey, I find it nice and smooth and very palatable. And incidentally, unfortunately, I am not sponsored. Oh, my lemon's gone. I am not sponsored by Shackleton whiskey. I buy this stuff with my own money. So basically all I'm going to do, what have I got here? So 40 milliliters. It's quite a big old shot. I'm going to put a half in. Sorry, a double. So shall we say a double? to start with, a double measure. Now I am measuring this out because I have a tendency to definitely take too much if I don't. So a double of whiskey, which will be followed by a single measure of triple sec. Now triple sec, you can substitute this for Cointreau, which is probably the most famous of all triple secs, but this is just a standard triple sec, which is a sweet orange flavour liqueur, and I'm just going to put a single measure of that into my measuring device to make sure I don't take too much of it. It's 25% alcohol, so there we go. Now I don't have a swizzle stick to make sure this is all mixed up. I'm going to use my multi-purpose penknife. There we go. Now to make sure this gets a bit of body to it, top it off with some form of cola. This is where you get a bit of personal expression. So if you like, say, cola with lime, cherry, vanilla, there's all different flavours available these days. You can put whatever you like in there. This particular one is just a standard one, caffeine free. It's not an expression of my views on caffeine, just happens to be what I had in the refrigerator. So I'm going to top that off. And there I have an Explorer's iced tea. So again, a little bit of a swizzle around in there. Make sure all those liqueurs are mixed up. Make sure the whiskey is well distributed without sloshing too much of it over the table. Let's give it a taste. Oh, almost forgot. A bit of lemon. A little bit of lemon to add some more bitterness to the sweetness from the triple sec. A little bit of lemon in there. Oh, let's give it a try. Oh, very nice indeed. Can taste the whiskey with that little hint of orange in the background. Well, let's go and sit by the fire, warm the cockles of our hearts as we soothe the pain of life with my Explorer iced tea on this beautiful Christmas Day afternoon. Let's go and have a sit down. Hello there, folks. I hope, like me, you're enjoying a restful festive day, having a little tipple, and it's all great. Firstly, I want to say thanks everyone. Many of you have sent messages of goodwill to me over this festive period and during my recent sabbatical from the channel. I was very touched by all of your messages. I was surprised by how many of you wrote to me and expressed an interest in my well-being. But that's all behind me now. The future is very bright, I can tell you, particularly for the channel, where I intend to keep the tempo going into 2023 and hopefully rise to even greater heights and meet many of you as the year unfolds. But for today, we're resting, putting our feet up and enjoying something. I love my Explorer iced tea. Now, the reason I included Explorer iced tea as my Christmas cocktail today, it's interesting. And like many things, it was a quirk of fate which made me spring to that decision. Because earlier in the week, I was out for the day with my wife, Rachel, in the historic Regency town of Cheltenham. Now, Cheltenham is in Gloucestershire, in the southern part of England, about 60 miles from where I live. And it's a beautiful, as I say, a Regency, architecturally beautiful, large town. I don't think it's a city, it's a large town. And anyway, I don't go there all that often, maybe twice a year at best, but we were doing a bit of Christmas shopping. We had a day off together, and I was walking down the promenade in Cheltenham, all beautiful Regency houses on either side, lovely independent stores, but almost tucked away without notice was a statue, a large bronze statue of a man in polar exploration clothing. Now, I've always had a profound interest in polar exploration from my early days, inspired by the likes of, Ernest Shackleton and people like that. So I went up to have a look at that statue. And the story which I discovered from that quirk of fate, just by me going over to have a look at that statue, has led me down a rabbit hole of reacquainting myself with polar exploration and certainly learning about the man whose image was depicted in bronze as I walked past. Now, the man has a name that you will be unfamiliar with, but his story really warmed my heart and fueled my spirit. Ultimately, it's a sad ending. But the man I stood before was Dr. Edward Wilson. Now, Wilson's name doesn't spring to mind as one of the great, notable, perhaps, polar explorers. Those who know about such things will know that he was. But Dr. Wilson, Edward Wilson, known as Bill Wilson, was known really for accompanying Scott on two of his major expeditions to the Antarctic. Now let me tell you a bit about Edward Wilson. He was, he's a proud son of the town of Cheltenham, and he became a physician, a doctor, very much like his father before him. And his relationship with the polar regions began when, in 1901, he joined Captain Scott, Robert Falcon Scott, on his first expedition to Antarctica, known as the Discovery Expedition, after the ship which they sailed on, the Discovery. Now, also on that expedition was the other polar great, Ernest Shackleton, who at that time was, quite a, some would say, a junior member of the expedition. He was still rising to the prominence which would take him to ever greater heights in the years ahead. But the expedition went south with the intention of mapping something of Antarctica and undertaking some scientific discoveries there, because, it was a largely unexplored part of the Earth's surface at that time. And Scott and his crew went down there, and Edward Wilson was one of the scientists, one of the doctors, and he was responsible for quite a lot of the scientific discoveries which took place during that expedition. Now, Wilson, it has been said, was, a polymath. He was somebody who had a multitude of different interests. He was a natural historian, absolutely. He was an ornithologist. He had an interest and a love in birds. And, a zoologist. You name it, if it was scientific, he was interested and involved. And he came away from that expedition, having forged a very close bond with the man who would become his friend, Robert Falcon Scott, and a great profound love of the southern parts of the world, the polar region, and particularly Antarctica. But the story doesn't end there. There was a further expedition to Antarctica, and I just want to reach down and pick my notebook up because I want to get the dates right here, because when you're immortalizing the memory of somebody who deserves to be remembered, I want to get the dates right. So in 1910, Edward Wilson, embarked again for South Atlantic with Robert Falcon Scott on what's become known as the Terra Nova expedition. The ship was known as the Terra Nova, but it was the British Antarctic expedition. And the goal this time was more than just to map the place and to find out more about it. They had the lofty goal of taking the first human beings to the South Pole. Because at this point, most of the great polar exploration things had been undertaken. The one thing which left the jewel in the crown, which everybody wanted, all the nations wanted, was to get to the South Pole, to claim it, to claim the glory. And Robert Scott, Captain Scott, had become, extremely fixated on achieving this. This was probably going to be his last attempt. He was, at this point, in his mid-40s, and time was ticking. He knew perhaps wouldn't have the physicality and the strength to attempt the pole again. It was a tough and arduous experience. But as I say, his friendship with Wilson was strong, and that's probably why Scott selected Edward Wilson to be one of the 5 elite people he chose to join him on the final party to get to the South Pole. They'd set up a base camp. It was now their intention to strike out and achieve the pole. Man-hauling all of their kit, so they carried all of their equipment. They didn't have dogs or mechanical equipment. It was all carried or towed behind you on a sledge. A very tough and arduous thing. Now, after 79 days on the ice, the party finally reached the pole on the 18th of January. Unfortunately, when they reached the pole, they were devastated to find a Norwegian flag already there. Their Norwegian contemporary, a man called Roald Amundsen, had achieved the pole some 5 weeks before them. And he had used dogs to pull his sled and to get themselves to the South Pole. But they'd been beaten in a straight fight to get to the pole first. So crestfallen can only, be the slightest way of describing it. They must have been devastated. But now they had to get back to their base camp. And this was always the trouble with polar exploration. However far you go, you've got to come exactly the same distance back. But on the return journey, you don't have the strength and the sort of vitality that you had on the outward journey, because, as you can imagine, malnutrition, exhaustion, constant exposure to, remarkably cold temperatures saps the strength. And they're utterly alone. There is no communication with anybody else. They're on their own. There's no support. There's no rescue. If something goes wrong, it's the end of the game. During the return journey, it did not go well. Of the 5 members, the first to lose their life was Petty Officer, and let me get his name right, Edgar Evans. Now, Edgar Evans was a Welshman. He was on Swansea. I've seen his statue in Swansea myself, a city not far from where I was originally from. And he fell down a crevasse, suffered a head injury, and he died a few days later. As they continued to struggle through the privations of the polar environment, another one of their party, Captain Lawrence Oates, Captain Oates, became frostbitten. His feet became terribly frostbitten, and he suffered gangrene on his feet. He realised that he was becoming a burden on his 3 other expeditioneers, and he was slowing them down. Unlikely that he would be the reason why they were unable to get back to safety, because they would never leave him, but they would always stay with him. And if they did so, undoubtedly, they would lose their lives. So in an act of remarkable self-sacrifice, Captain Oates got up one night when they were sat in their tent, weathering a minus 40 degree Celsius blizzard. He got to his feet, stumbled out into the night, and as he was leaving, he turned and said to his other comrades, "I'm just going outside. I may be some time." Captain Oates was a voracious journal keeper, and he left prestigious notes about the expedition found after his death, and he records this, and he says, we knew what he was doing. We tried to convince him not to do that, but he chose the death of an English gentleman rather than compromise the likelihood of his friends achieving safety. And I think that's worthy of the whole story in itself, the sacrifice of Captain Oates. 3 men remained: Captain Scott, Edward Wilson, and another younger man called Bowers, Henry Bowers. So the 3 of them pushed on through that horrific polar environment. But they were beset by a blizzard, minus 40 degrees. They were utterly exhausted, frozen to the bone. Malnutrition had affected them. They'd not had a proper meal in God knows how long. They'd been on the ice for more than 4 months. They were at the very point of death. And sure enough, death befell them. Unfortunately, the 3 men lost their lives and froze to death in that tent. Now, as I said, it's not a happy ending. They were only 148 miles from their base camp, but in an environment like that, in the condition they were in, it just as well be 1,000 miles. It was impossible. They had lost their lives. They all froze to death in that tent. However, a rescue party was sent out. It took several months, and I think 6, 7, 8 months later, their tent was discovered. The 3 men were found frozen inside that tent. But the part of this story which warms the cockles of my heart, as I said, was the story of friendship. A brotherly love between Captain Scott and Edward Wilson, 2 men who had experienced the worst privations that any human being can, and had taken it to the extent that they both had died together. Now, we know that Scott was the last to die, because he had a journal, and he had written in the journal, as he was lying in his sleeping bag, freezing to death, the final events of the last few days of their lives, as their very life essence ebbed away in those freezing temperatures. And he records in his diary of Edward Wilson: "He died as he lived, a brave, true man, the best of comrades and the staunchest of friends." And I think that says a lot about the relationship, that even as he lay dying, he was able to record this epitaph about his friend Edward Wilson, this man who had been by his side. And also in one of the letters which he left to sort of pass on after his time, he also said, "Words fail me when I talk of Bill Wilson. I really believe he is the finest character I have ever met." And these words got me thinking about relationships, friendships, the bond that exists between men, particularly in times of great adversity. But the thing which really touched me was the recollection of the people, the rescuers, all too late as rescuers, but the people who discovered the bodies. They entered the tent as it was frozen, and they found the men, of course, all dead. Henry Bowers and Bill Wilson lay dead, frozen in their sleeping bags. But Captain Scott, his sleeping bag was open, he was partially out of his sleeping bag, and his arms were extended around the body of Bill Wilson. Even at the point of his own death, it seemed he was attempting to shield his friend, to protect him, to keep from him the fate of death which awaited them all. And that really touched me, and it made me feel very emotional about the bonds of friendship and how important they are, and how important love is at this time of year. At Christmas, when we all come together, we share a time together. Now, the statue I stood before when I discovered this, I was fascinated to discover, was actually modelled, created by the widow of Robert Falcon Scott, Kathleen Scott, who was an artist, and she herself had modelled that statue of her husband's greatest friend, his staunchest friend, as in his own words. And I found it amazing that I'd never really heard of Edward Wilson before, a man who deserved to have his story known about, a scientist, a polymath, but also an amazing friend, a brother to those who needed it. He was greatly respected by the other members of the expedition, to the extent that they referred to him as Uncle Bill, because, his judgment was highly regarded. And he was known as a great mediator, because as people fell out and, they become sort of disgruntled with each other during the long months that they spent in each other's constant company, he was able to bridge the friendships, to bring people together. And that's what's needed, really, isn't it, at this time of year? If you're sharing the house with family members who you rarely see, think of Edward Wilson and how he was able to achieve the impossible in times of arduousness, and how he met his end as a true British explorer, tragically, sadly, without success, but in the best possible way. So that's my story about my explorer's iced tea, and that's why I chose it today, to toast you at home as you are enjoying your Christmas break with family and friends. Thank you again for joining me at Oak Lodge today for another day in the woodland, special day in the woodland, a Christmas day. Thanks to all of you who have supported the channel over the last 12 months, who have made it grow to a size that I would never have imagined possible. And hopefully we will continue to grow and touch more people and bring more people into our community as 2023 reveals itself to us as we go forwards. I've got lots of great content planned for you, lots of it already filmed. During my sabbatical, I was not idle. I was making lots of content for you, which I will unleash upon you as the new year begins. So please accept my most sincere regards as we enter the new year and we see off 2022. Thank you so much for being with me on the journey. Stay with me as we go through 2023. I wish you all the very best. I wish you a healthy and prosperous 2023, and of course a wonderful festive period over Christmas. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more like this, don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to buy me a Christmas coffee, you can do so by clicking on the link below in the show notes, and it'll take you to my Buy Me a Coffee page, where you'll also find the regular podcasts that I also put on that page too. So until the next time, take care over Christmas. I'll see you in the new year. Cheers to you, chaps. Oh, I forgot the salute.